Today, we are going to look at a nation that, well, it managed to grow its economy by over 200 times.
Yeah, which is just an incredible number when you say it out loud.
Right. But in the process of engineering that absolute miracle, they accidentally built their own, demographic and environmental cliff edge.
It's a developmental paradox,
Hmm.
and it fundamentally changes how we actually understand economic progress.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, if you ever wondered what happens when a country basically hits fast forward on the Industrial Revolution.
Speed runs it, really.
Yeah, speed runs it. This is the deep dive you need. Because today we are deconstructing the last 60 years of Malaysia's structural transformation.
And it really is the ultimate double-edged sword of modernization. I mean, you have this nation that is widely celebrated as an Asian economic miracle.
Right. Everybody uses that phrase.
They do, and for good reason. They pulled themselves out of agrarian poverty at just a breakneck pace.
But, and this is the core of what we're looking at today, when we look under the hood of that soaring GDP, the underlying fuel mixture has changed.
Fundamentally changed. And perhaps irreversibly so.
Yeah. The numbers in the source material we have today, they present just a staggering contrast. So since 1960, while that GDP was just exploding upward.
This is slide one of the data we're looking at, right?
Yes, exactly. While GDP exploded, the total fertility rate, so the average number of children born to a woman, it just collapsed. It went from 6.4 down to below 1.6.
Which is a massive, massive drop.
It's a free fall. And simultaneously, their per capita carbon emissions skyrocketed by over 300%.
Right, so you have this rapidly shrinking youth population.
An aging workforce.
Yeah, and an environment that is just under immense, immense pressure.
So the core question we are unpacking for you today is, how much longer can this Asian tiger run before the engine just completely seizes out?
Well, to answer that, I think we have to understand how the engine was built in the first place.
Right. We need to look at the mechanics.
Exactly. The framework we're using today covers four main dimensions. First, their economic takeoff.
The jump from farms to digital.
Right. Then second, the population turning points, so that life and fertility scissors effect. Third, the massive gains in human capital.
And fourth, the environmental price tag.
Because that bill always comes due when a nation compresses a century of development into just a few decades.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the sheer economic velocity, the first dimension.
The economic rocket.
Yeah. Picture Malaysia in 1960. The gross domestic product was roughly $1.9 billion.
Which is tiny.
It's so small, and it was a largely agrarian economy.
Right, the daily reality for a massive portion of the population was literally pulling raw materials out of the earth.
Tapping rubber trees.
Tapping rubber, mining tin, subsistence farming. I mean, agriculture made up an astonishing 43.7% of the entire national economy.
Almost half of everything the country produced was just tied directly to the dirt.
Being tied to the dirt in the mid-20th century, well, it meant your nation was at the absolute mercy of global commodity prices.
Because if the global price of raw rubber drops,
your entire national income just plummets.
right,
It is a highly vulnerable, low-margin existence.
you extract the value from your land, but the real profit is made by someone else.
Exactly. By the industrialized nations that take your raw rubber and turn it into tires or, factory machinery.
Which makes their subsequent transformation so deliberate. I mean, they didn't just stumble into wealth.
No, they orchestrated a complete rewiring of their means of production.
Because by 2022, that $1.9 billion GDP had soared to over $407 billion.
It's an exponential leap.
And that 43.7% agricultural anchor, it steadily collapsed down to just around 7 or 8% today.
But the mechanism behind that collapse, it wasn't that they just forgot how to farm.
Right, they didn't just walk away from the fields for no reason.
No, it was a highly aggressive, very strategic pivot to manufacturing.
Starting heavily in the 1970s and 80s, right?
Yeah, the government created these free trade zones. They offered massive tax incentives and actively courted foreign direct investment.
Especially in electronics, right? Like semiconductors.
Yeah, exactly. They invited the world's tech companies to come and build their factories there. So manufacturing climbed from this relatively minor role to a peak of over 30% in the late 90s.
Wow. Over 30%.
Yeah. And today, it sits as the absolute bedrock of the economy at around 21 to 23%.
Think about the actual logistics of that pivot, though. For you listening, just imagine you have this massive workforce trained in manual agricultural labor.
People who have worked outside their whole lives.
Right. And you have to somehow physically and honestly culturally retrain those workers to operate inside sterile, high-tech semiconductor fabrication plants.
It's wild. It's like swapping a tractor engine for a factory turbine while the vehicle's barreling down the highway.
That's exactly what it is. And that moving vehicle took some massive hits along the way, too.
Oh, absolutely. The growth wasn't just this frictionless upward curve. I mean, look at the late 90s Asian financial crisis.
That decimated currencies across the entire region.
Right. And then, a couple of decades later, the 2020 COVID pandemic caused global supply chains to completely freeze.
But if you look at the data, the economic elasticity is just remarkable.
The bounce-back capability was there. And it was there because their manufacturing base had become so deeply integrated into the global supply chain.
They weren't just making, cheap plastic toys.
Exactly. They were manufacturing the critical internal components that the rest of the world's technology literally relied upon.
But wait, shifting an entire nation's primary income from farms to factories, that changes far more than just what people do from 9 to 5.
Oh, it changes everything.
Because you can't just drop a massive electronics factory into the middle of a rubber plantation and expect it to work. You need centralized labor.
And that centralization is the crucial catalyst for everything that follows.
Yeah.
I mean, economists referred to the moment when manufacturing permanently surpasses agriculture as a golden crossing.
A golden crossing, I like that term.
Yeah, but physically, on the ground, that crossing requires a massive human migration.
Because to staff a factory, you need thousands of workers showing up for the exact same shift.
Right, which means you need urban centers. Millions of people had to migrate from these dispersed rural villages into highly concentrated cities.
And when you suddenly have millions of people living shoulder to shoulder in a brand new urban center, you have to build a world that can actually sustain them.
Which brings us to the second dimension.
Yeah.
The actual physical wiring of the modern citizen.
Because a soaring GDP, it's just a number on a ledger until it translates into actual human development.
Exactly. The translation of wealth into infrastructure is what makes the difference between a rich state and a rich society.
Right.
When you concentrate a population for industrial work, the immediate, brutal logistics of housing, sanitation, and power, they become matters of national security.
You simply cannot run a 21st century economy on 19th century infrastructure.
You can't. And the electrification data we have here is just a staggering logistical achievement.
We are talking about hitting a 100% electricity access rate.
100%.
And the geography they're dealing with isn't just flat, easy terrain. It's deep jungles, it's mountains, it's remote islands.
So pushing the grid to 100% means the rural-urban divide, which usually traps developing nations in this awful cycle of inequality.
It was effectively erased, at least when it came to baseline power.
Exactly. And that foundational layer of electricity dictates the sequence of every single technological leap that comes after it.
We see this incredibly clearly in the digital adoption rates.
Oh, yeah. The mobile cellular subscriptions.
Today, those subscriptions have shot past 142 per 100 people.
Meaning there are significantly more connected devices in the country than there are actual human beings.
But you can't hand someone a smartphone if they live in a village with literally no way to charge it.
Right. The grid has to arrive before the cell tower.
That sequencing is the invisible backbone of this entire economic leap. The physical infrastructure paved the way for the digital era.
You cannot leapfrog into mobile banking or widespread internet access or a digital service economy without first conquering the physical dirt and wire logistics.
You have to run the power lines into every single home first.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The physical wiring is impressive, sure, but the rewiring of the human capital is where the real societal shift happens.
The education data.
Yes. When we look at education, primary net enrollment is consistently above 95%.
Practically every child is in school.
But the specific metric that completely redefines their economic engine is the gender parity index, the ratio of female to male enrollment.
And historically, in agrarian societies, the economic logic of a family heavily prioritizes physical labor.
Right. Boys are often kept in school longer, or they get the priority for resources.
While girls might be kept home to assist with domestic labor or, subsistence farming, it's a harsh, pragmatic reality of low-income rural life.
But as the economy transitions to manufacturing and services, the value of physical muscle drops.
And the value of a literate, educated mind just skyrockets.
And in Malaysia, the gender parity index in basic education didn't just reach 1.0, which would be perfect equality.
Right. It actually tipped slightly over 1.0.
Women have achieved and marginally surpassed parity with men in basic education.
And the macroeconomic impact of that, I mean, it cannot be overstated.
It's massive.
When a nation takes half of its population that was previously sidelined from high-value economic participation and educates them equally, you unlock a dormant superpower.
You instantly double your potential pool of innovators, managers, engineers.
Exactly. And the ripple effects go far beyond just adding more workers to a factory floor.
Oh, absolutely. There is a profound, literal life-saving mechanism that kicks in when you educate women.
And it shows up brilliantly in the health data, specifically infant mortality.
Let's contextualize what things look like at the start of this journey for them. In 1960, the infant mortality rate was 68.3 deaths per 1,000 live births.
Nearly 7 out of every 100 babies born did not survive their first year.
For you listening, just imagine the psychological toll that takes on a community, on a family, when child loss is just a statistically normal part of life.
It forces families into a very specific reproductive strategy. You have 6 or 7 children because you are operating under this tragic assumption that not all of them will make it to adulthood.
But look at the transformation. That mortality rate has plummeted to roughly 6.7 deaths per 1,000 live births.
That is a nearly 90% reduction.
To understand how they achieved a 90% reduction, we have to connect the dots of everything we've discussed so far.
Right, because it wasn't just that the government built a new hospitals.
No, it's a massive systemic chain reaction.
And the chain reaction looks exactly like this. A paved road allows construction crews to lay an electrical grid.
Okay.
The electrical grid allows a rural clinic to install a refrigerator.
Which means that refrigerator can now store vaccines and antibiotics safely.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the clean water infrastructure eradicates the waterborne pathogens like cholera that are highly fatal to infants.
But the final, and really the most crucial link in that chain, is the educated mother.
Yes. When that gender parity index crosses 1.0, you are raising a generation of girls who can read.
An educated mother understands prenatal nutrition. She can read the dosage instructions on a bottle of infant fever reducer.
She understands the importance of clinical hygiene.
And because she is likely participating in the modernized workforce we talked about, she actually has the economic capital to pay for modern healthcare.
The drop to 6.7 deaths per 1,000 is the ultimate proof of concept here. The $407 billion GDP isn't just an abstract economic victory.
It's the literal mechanism that kept those infants alive.
The infrastructure, the education, and the economic growth are all inextricably linked to human survival.
So up to this point, we are looking at the textbook definition of a developing nation doing absolutely everything right.
And a master class in development.
They industrialized, they electrified the deepest rural areas, they broke the historical gender barrier in schools, and they saved their children. But this brings us to the paradox, the cliff edge that we mentioned at the very beginning.
Right. Because every single one of those massive victories triggered an unintended slow-motion crisis in the very fabric of the population structure.
This is our third dimension, the demographic scissors.
This raises an important question, right? When a society radically alters its environment and its economy, the biological behavior of the population adapts just as radically.
We see three massive shifts happening simultaneously in the data. First, life expectancy.
It jumped from an average of 57.1 years in 1960 to roughly 76 years today.
With women actually enjoying a specific longevity advantage, living to about 78 compared to men at around 73 or 74.
So people are living far longer.
Second shift, the fertility collapse.
Yeah.
We touched on this in the intro. It dropped from 6.4 children per woman to a staggering 1.6 to 1.8 today.
And just as a baseline for you listening, a population needs a fertility rate of 2.1 just to mathematically replace itself.
Which means the native population structure is actively contracting. The base of the demographic pyramid is hollowing out.
And that leads directly to the third shift, the aging factor.
The old age dependency ratio. This measures the number of elderly people relying on the working age population.
And that ratio doubled from 5.4% to almost 11%.
While at the exact same time, the youth dependency ratio plummeted from 87.8% down to 30.9%.
The societal pyramid is completely inverting, the broad base of youth is disappearing, and the top layer of retirees is expanding rapidly.
But wait, I want to push back on the panic around this for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If you look at the United Kingdom or Japan or the US isn't living longer and having fewer kids, just the standard predictable playbook for getting richer.
It is.
Because when infant mortality drops, like we just discussed, families naturally stop having 6 kids because they know the 2 they have will actually survive.
Right.
Furthermore, when you move a family from a farm to a city apartment, kids transition from being free agricultural labor, extra hands to harvest the crops, into massive urban expenses.
Oh, yeah. You have to pay for childcare, extra bedrooms, higher education.
Exactly. So a drop to 1.6 seems entirely logical. Why is this a cliff for Malaysia?
Well, the logic of the transition is sound. The issue is not the fact that it happened. It is the sheer velocity with which it happened.
The speed of the drop.
Yes.
Yeah.
And combined with where the country currently sits on the global wealth spectrum, there is this deeply concerning concept in developmental economics known as getting old before getting rich.
Oh, wow. Unpack the timeline of that for me. How does velocity actually change the outcome?
Take your example of the United Kingdom. When the UK went through its industrial revolution, its urbanization, and that subsequent demographic transition to smaller families, that process took well over a century.
Right. They had a long time to adjust.
Generations upon generations to slowly build up immense reservoirs of national wealth.
They had the time to establish robust taxation models, universal health care, pension systems.
Exactly, before their population became top-heavy with retirees. Malaysia has compressed that entire 150-year process into about 4 decades.
They speed ran the entire demographic cycle.
Exactly. Visualize those 2 data lines on a graph. You have the line of life expectancy soaring upward and the line of fertility violently plummeting downward.
They cross each other like the blades of a pair of scissors.
Yes. And the rapidly widening space between those blades represents an accelerating crisis in the social dependency ratio.
Let's trace that back to the factory workers from the 1990s. The millions of young people who moved from the farms to the cities.
The ones who powered that massive 30% manufacturing boom.
Right. They are now in their late 50s and 60s. They are approaching retirement.
And because the fertility rate has been collapsing toward 1.6 for decades, there simply isn't a massive wave of young workers entering the labor force to replace them on the factory floor.
The labor pool is shrinking.
So the engine is literally running out of human fuel.
But it's worse than just a labor shortage, right? Because it's also a financial crisis.
The financial burden shifts dramatically. You now have a smaller and smaller pool of young, active workers who must be taxed at higher rates.
To support the pensions, the infrastructure, and crucially, the healthcare costs of a larger and larger pool of retirees.
Retirees who are living longer than any generation before them.
Which is incredibly expensive.
It is. If a country is deeply historically wealthy, like Japan, it can endure the intense financial strain of an aging population.
Though even Japan really struggles with it.
They do. But if a country is in the upper middle income bracket, fighting to make that final difficult leap to high income status,
An aging workforce acts as a gravitational pull that can just freeze their economic progress entirely.
it's the ultimate irony of their success. You defeat infant mortality, you eradicate absolute poverty, you give people long lives.
And the mathematical reward is a slow-motion demographic collapse.
It forces a massive reckoning. And that reckoning extends far beyond just the age of the citizens.
Which brings us to our fourth dimension, the modern afflictions. Because just as the population structure changed, the very bodies of the citizens underwent a biological shock.
The medical data reveals a complete transformation in the national disease profile.
We are looking at the rapid rise of non-communicable diseases, or NCDs.
Right, these are conditions you cannot catch from another person. Things like heart disease, cancer, and diabetes.
The numbers on diabetes alone are staggering. The prevalence rate among adults is now 21.1%.
1 in 5 adults is dealing with a severe metabolic disorder.
And overall, these non-communicable diseases now account for over 71 to 73% of all deaths in the country.
This is the biological toll of the Golden Crossing we discussed earlier.
When you move an entire population from an agrarian lifestyle to an urban industrialized one, you fundamentally change how the human body interacts with its environment.
The contrast is incredibly stark if you just picture the daily routine. In 1960, a massive percentage of the workforce was doing intense manual labor outdoors,
They were walking miles a day.
eating a traditional diet largely composed of whatever was grown locally. The main threats to their lives were infectious.
Malaria, cholera, tuberculosis.
Diseases that strike fast and are largely eradicated by the infrastructure, plumbing, and vaccines we talked about.
But then the economy modernizes. that agricultural worker's grandchild now lives in a dense urban apartment.
They commute by car or bus instead of walking.
They work a highly sedentary job in an air-conditioned office or, at a mechanized factory station.
And their diet shifts toward highly caloric, heavily processed convenience foods because they are working long hours.
The physical stress of farm labor is literally replaced by the chronic psychological stress of modern urban life.
The country traded infectious diseases for lifestyle diseases.
The nation modernized, and the ways people die modernized right alongside the GDP.
But here is the critical economic difference. A vaccine for cholera is cheap and it's permanent.
Right?
Treating chronic diabetes, heart disease, and cancer in an aging population, that requires decades of expensive, continuous pharmaceutical and clinical care.
And returning to our previous point about the shrinking youth workforce, who is going to pay the taxes to fund the immense national healthcare budget required for that?
To manage a population where 73% of deaths are caused by complex chronic conditions, the physical ailments of the population become massive macroeconomic liabilities.
It's a heavy biological tax. But what I find so fascinating is how this bodily analogy applies on a macro scale to the actual environment.
The environmental price tag.
Yes, because the actual metabolism of the Malaysian economy, the way it consumes energy to sustain its $407 billion mass, is increasingly toxic to its own ecosystem.
The environmental toll of rapid industrialization is the silent crisis running parallel to the demographic one.
We are looking at a carbon explosion.
The data shows per capita carbon dioxide emissions soaring to over 8 tons of CO2 equivalent.
And to put a dollar amount on what that means, economists track a metric called the social cost of carbon damage.
Right.
In the early years of Malaysia's economic takeoff, the estimated cost of that damage was around $661 million.
Which is substantial.
But in recent years, that annual damage cost has ballooned to over $10.5 billion.
Because you cannot power a manufacturing miracle without burning massive amounts of fuel.
And that $10.5 billion isn't just an abstract penalty on a spreadsheet.
No, it represents real-world attrition. It's the rising cost of public health interventions due to severe air pollution.
The physical degradation of roads and coastal infrastructure from increasingly extreme weather events.
And the long-term degradation of agricultural yields due to shifting climate patterns.
It's a massive hidden invoice that has been accumulating for 60 years. And the structural way they generate their energy makes paying that invoice incredibly difficult.
This exposes the most severe structural lag in their entire developmental story.
The fossil fuel trap.
Exactly. When you look at their energy mix today, fossil fuels, primarily coal and natural gas, stubbornly account for over 92% of their total energy consumption.
Over 92%. That is heavily driven by the massive electricity demands of their manufacturing sector, right?
And the fuel demands of their transport logistics, yes.
Yeah. This is the definition of a developmental trap. I mean, you walk through Kuala Lumpur today, or you look at the semiconductor fabrication plants in Penang.
And you see the absolute cutting edge of a 21st century digital economy.
But the power lines feeding their high-tech hubs are tethered to a grid that operates on the exact same dirty logic as the 20th century.
It is a sleek, modern house built on a foundation of coal.
The sheer inertia of that energy grid is immense.
When 92% of your economy is reliant on cheap fossil fuels to maintain its competitive pricing on the global manufacturing stage.
Transitioning away from those fuels threatens the very GDP growth that keeps the country stable.
But there was a buffer, right? A kind of ecological safety net that is currently keeping the situation from becoming completely catastrophic.
Yes, the LULUCF data. That stands for land use change, and forestry.
This is where the geography of Malaysia plays a crucial role.
Because it is located in the tropics and still retains immense, dense forest cover, those forests act as a massive carbon sink.
The data indicates that these ecosystems are actively pulling carbon out of the atmosphere,
providing negative emissions that absorb over 200 million tons of CO2 equivalent every single year.
To use your earlier analogy regarding the physical body, if the industrial economy is producing toxins at a massive rate,
the sprawling tropical forests are acting as the nation's liver.
Exactly. They're sitting there silently, constantly filtering out a huge portion of the industrial exhaust.
Subsidizing the carbon footprint of the economic miracle, the silent forest. It's doing the heavy lifting.
But a liver can only filter so much toxicity before the tissue itself begins to scar and fail.
And there is a terrifying precedent hidden in the historical data regarding how Malaysia has treated this exact ecological buffer in the past.
If we look back at the metric for net forest depletion during the 1960s and 70s,
The very beginning of their economic takeoff.
right, the depletion rate hit an alarming 33% of gross national income.
Meaning a third of their national wealth generation was tied directly to liquidating their own forests.
They were logging at a highly aggressive, unsustainable rate to generate the initial capital needed to fund their leap into industrialization.
They were literally burning the furniture to heat the house.
Today, largely because they transitioned to high-value manufacturing and realized the ecological necessity of their jungles, that depletion rate has dropped dramatically to about 1.7%.
They slowed the destruction.
But here is the terrifying hypothetical.
Okay.
We know the demographic engine is slowing down. We know the youth workforce is shrinking, and the cost of caring for an aging diabetic population is soaring.
Right.
If GDP growth stalls, and the government finds itself desperate for rapid capital infusion, what is stopping them from turning back to the forests?
Oh, wow. That is the ultimate environmental risk.
Because the forests currently provide a 200 million ton carbon subsidy, any return to the high forest depletion rates of the past would trigger a catastrophic double blow.
It wouldn't just add massive new emissions from the logging equipment and land clearing,
It would systematically destroy the biological filter itself.
taking out the liver while simultaneously doubling the poison.
The net emissions would launch into the stratosphere.
That $10.5 billion carbon damage cost we mentioned earlier would just multiply exponentially.
Likely wiping out any short-term capital gained from selling the timber. It is an ecological tripwire that they simply cannot afford to cross.
So, synthesizing all of this, what does this 60-year journey actually mean for the mechanics of nation building?
It means we must look at Malaysia with a profound duality.
On one side of the ledger, you have one of the most breathtaking developmental triumphs of the modern era.
Truly, they took a vulnerable, dirt road, rubber-tapping economy and engineered it into a formidable global towerhouse.
They largely eradicated absolute poverty. They achieved what many nations still only dream of, 100% electrification, effectively conquering their own rugged geography.
They brought women fully into the educational fold, fundamentally elevating their societal status.
And they saved millions of infants from early deaths. It is a blueprint of success that much of the developing world desperately studies.
But the flip side is that the blueprint worked perfectly for the first feet of development.
The brutal reality of the data is that the free rides are officially over.
The demographic dividend, that massive, seemingly endless wave of young, cheap labor that built the factories and lured the foreign investment, has expired.
The healthcare system, which so masterfully conquered infectious diseases, is now buckling under a chronic, incredibly expensive epidemic of lifestyle diseases.
And the environment, acting as the silent, patient filter for 6 decades of explosive growth, is redlining at its absolute carrying capacity.
The unavoidable conclusion is that the next 60 years simply cannot rely on the playbook of the last 60 years.
They cannot attempt to solve future economic stagnation by throwing more cheap labor and dirty coal at the problem.
Because the cheap labor no longer exists and the dirty coal is choking their future.
They need a secondary structural transformation, one that is arguably much harder than the first.
Moving from agriculture to manufacturing is hard, but moving from a fossil fuel-reliant, labor-intensive manufacturing hub to a high-tech, automated, green energy economy, that requires a massive leap of innovation.
They have to clean up a grid that is 92% fossil fuels.
They have to lean heavily into artificial intelligence and robotics to maintain factory output with a rapidly shrinking human workforce.
And they need to engineer massive social security and pension reforms to care for an aging population without financially crushing the youth who remain.
It is a monumental society-wide task, and it forces us to consider a lingering, complex question as we look toward the rest of the 21st century.
Right now, global supply chains are shifting dramatically again, driven by new geopolitical realities and the rapid rise of AI.
Will countries that followed the Asian tiger model, like Malaysia, be able to nimbly leapfrog into sustainable green tech and AI-driven economies?
Or will they find themselves trapped by the sheer inertia of the industrial architecture, the massive fossil fuel-reliant factories, and the irreversible demographic realities that made them rich in the first place?
Can a nation successfully tear down and rebuild its engine for a second time while the vehicle is moving faster and heavier than ever before?
That is the defining developmental question of our era.
It challenges the assumption that the graph always goes neatly up and to the right. I want to encourage you, the listener, as you go about your week, to cast a critical eye on your own country's economy.
Whether you live in a rapidly developing nation or a long-established industrialized one, look past the headline GDP numbers.
Try to spot these same hidden scissors at play in your own society. Look at the aging curve of your neighborhood.
Look the energy source powering your modern conveniences.
Every single nation operates on a diagnostic landscape that might look clean and victorious on a basic chart,
Yep.
but is incredibly complex and precarious when you truly look under the hood.
The engine of progress is always infinitely more complicated and infinitely more fragile than the speedometer suggests.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.